Do you want to know a secret? The voice almost made me jump. I glanced up from the book I was reading to find an old man sat opposite me. I was on the train home from uni at the time, and I'd been reading for most of the journey. I didn't even hear him sit down. The first thing I noticed about the man was his age. When I say the guy was old, I mean old. The poor bastard looked like he was on his last legs. The lines on his face were so deep they could have been carved. His watery blue eyes stared out from wrinkled pits. There were heavy purple bags under those eyes that looked like bruises, as if the guy hadn't slept in years. The second thing I noticed about him was the object balanced on his lap, a large black box, scuffed around the edges. I'm not going to say the box looked older than he did, but the thing had clearly seen better days. The man stared at me without blinking, and it took a moment to remember he'd asked a question. Sorry? I asked if you want to know a secret. So I had heard him right. I glanced from the box to his blue eyes, my mind making a fast calculation about him. Was the guy unhinged or simply a lonely old man looking to make small talk? There was no discernible expression on his face, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place. Not a sadness exactly, but something similar to that. No, the guy was probably just lonely, and how dangerous could someone his age really be anyway? What sort of secret is it? I smiled across at him, but he didn't smile back. The secret to never grow old. Never growing old? That's right. I had to suppress a grin. If the man sitting in front of me knew the secret to never aging, he obviously hadn't perfected it yet. His gnarled hands, which were clutched around the box in the way a mother might cradle a baby, shook as I watched him. Okay, try me, I said. What's the secret to never growing old? The man stared at me for a moment without saying anything. Outside the train window, trees and fields blurred by. The man opened his mouth, licked his lips, then closed it again. His watery eyes didn't blink. I caught another glimpse of the same thing I'd seen before in those eyes. That half sadness. But a second later, it was gone again. The thing is, said the man, I can't really tell you what the secret is. He cleared his throat. I have to show you. His eyes flicked down to the box in his lap. The gnarled hands shifted. I keep it in here. Now, at this moment, I had two choices. I could politely excuse myself, or I could continue to indulge what I was rapidly suspecting might be more than just lonely small talk. The man was obviously a bit deluded. He still hadn't smiled, and he was staring at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. The whole way through school, we'd been warned about talking to strangers, not to get too close to them, certainly not to take anything from them, just to walk away. But I wasn't at school anymore, was I? I was a university student now, an adult, and the man in front of me was so decrepit he couldn't possibly pose a threat. All of these thoughts flew through my head in the space of a couple of seconds. I think what decided it in the end, though, what made me choose to indulge him just a little longer, was simple curiosity. I wanted to see inside the box, even if it turned out to be something completely ridiculous. I wanted to find out what the guy had in there regardless. At the very least, it might make for an amusing story. I smiled at him and stood up from my seat, moved across and sat down beside him. So, I said, where did you stumble across the secret to never aging anyway? An old man showed it to me, he muttered, almost to himself. Then his eyes flicked from me down to the box. His fingers shifted and slid across its surface, found the lid. They shook worse than ever. A moment before the old man opened it, he whispered something to me I'll never forget. I'm so sorry, he said. But we're lucky in a way, the two of us. His fingers pried open the box's lid. I leaned forward and looked inside, and I fell into the void. I don't really know how to describe what I saw and experienced in the endless window of time that followed. I've thought about it a lot, replayed it over and over again in my mind, dreamed about it, but it's very hard to articulate. I'll do my best. The first thing was the sight my eyes registered when I looked into the box. Darkness. The inside of the thing was utterly pitch black, like staring into the mouth of a very deep cave. A total absence of anything. The darkness seemed to shift and expand as I stared into it, reaching out from the box and spilling into my peripheral vision. The next thing I remember was a falling sensation. Have you ever been skydiving or ridden on a really steep roller coaster? There's a feeling of hollowness you get as you drop when your stomach seems to push its way into your throat. A sick, dizzying rush. That was the feeling I had in that moment, and it was stronger than anything like it I'd ever felt before in my life. It was as though the blackness in that box was alive, and as I leaned over it, it rushed out and swallowed me whole. One minute I was sat in the train beside the old man. The next I was free-falling through an abyss. There was no sound whatsoever in that void. The background noises of the train, the rush of the carriage on its rails, the faint mutter of other passengers vanished as if the volume had been muted. But the darkness wasn't entirely empty. As I plummeted through infinite blackness, my eyes picked out tiny pinpricks of distant light, smaller than grains of sand. Most were impossibly faint, but a few were bright enough to stand out in the dark. I think they may have been stars. I don't know how long I fell for. Time no longer seemed to register. I could have spent seconds in that empty space. It could have been years. All I know is that it all ended when I saw another shape come tumbling towards me. The shape was distant at first, just another pinprick of light. But as I fell towards it, it gradually became more and more distinct. At some point, I realized it was another person. I picked out 4 limbs flailing through the dark, a light dusting of gray hair, and finally, as the person hurtled towards me through the yawning black sea, I saw 2 wide blue eyes. A second before I crashed into the old man, the universe vanished. I opened my eyes and saw the train, blue seats opposite me, faint chatter from other passengers, a station outside the window slowly rolling by as the train picked up its pace. No sign of the old man anywhere. That's okay, I thought to myself. You had a bad dream, that's all. You fell asleep and dreamed the whole thing. But I knew that wasn't right. There was something about my surroundings that was subtly different, which my shell-shocked mind couldn't yet place. My body felt different too. Weak and sore as if I'd just run a marathon. I shifted in my seat and felt something in my lap. I looked down. The black box was there, its lid firmly back on. I drew in a sharp breath. I suddenly felt incredibly lightheaded. It wasn't the side of the box that did it though. It was my hands. The shaking hands that were clasped around the object in my lap, so tight the knuckles had turned white. The hands were wrinkled and gnarled at the joints with arthritis. They didn't belong to me. All that happened 6 months ago. I've been officially missing for the past 5 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days. Apparently, I was last seen on CCTV footage exiting the channel tunnel in Calais. No one has seen me since. Whoever the person is that's now inside my 18-year-old body, they clearly had a plan in place. I've watched the whole thing play out on the news. A university student who decides to run away from home isn't exactly front-page stuff, but one who disappears so successfully is. For the first week, it was all the papers seemed to be talking about. The hardest part has been seeing my family on the television. My brother and sister red-faced in front of the camera, my dad looking pale, Mum crying. Seeing her upset was the worst of all. That first week after it happened, I actually traveled back to my hometown and followed my mom into a Tesco. She was white-faced, shuffling around the store like a zombie. A few people came up to her, probably people who recognized her from the TV, to say how sorry they were. She nodded and forced a smile, didn't say anything back. Eventually, I worked up the courage to approach her too. I don't know what I was expecting when she turned to face me. I guess a part of me hoped that, despite how different I look now, she'd have recognized something in me, seen something in my eyes. She didn't, though. She just smiled and nodded when I spoke, like she did with the other strangers. All she saw was an old man. I need to act soon. One way or another, I know I need to. The man who stole my life may have been desperate, but he wasn't a complete monster. He left me enough money in the pocket of the blazer he wore to survive. Enough to pay for food and hotels, at least for a while. At least while I make my own decision, because the money wasn't the only thing he left me, was it? He also left me the black box. And ever since I woke back up on the train and found the thing in my lap, I've never let it out of my sight. I carry it with me wherever I go, hold it in my arms when I shuffle the streets, sleep next to it in my hotel room, and so far at least, I've kept the lid firmly in place. But I don't know how much longer that can last. The thing is, I'm old, impossibly old. My body feels like a car that's changed owners so many times and driven so many miles that it's only got a few left in the tank. I need to do something before it's too late. In the months after it happened, I told myself I couldn't do it. Not ever. I told myself I could never put another person through the thing that I've been put through. But lately I've felt afraid. Afraid I'll fall down some steps and break something. Afraid I'll get ill. Afraid that one day my exhausted husk of a body will finally just shut down. Afraid I'll be gone, really, finally gone, before I even turn 19. So, I've been riding the train, the same line I used to take to and from uni, back and forth. I carry the box with me, of course, and I watch the other passengers. A couple of weeks ago, I spotted one handsome, if a little nervous-looking young man. Short brown hair, a friendly face. Must be homesick because he's traveled home the last 2 weekends in a row. Reminds me of me. I haven't spoken to him yet. I doubt he's even noticed me, to be honest. But I have been watching him. Watching him and planning. One day soon, God help me, I think I may have to introduce myself.